And I need to share my screen.
No, you can do it.
Okay. Let me just find it real quick. All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Excellent. And are we ready? Good. Okay, well then, good afternoon, everybody. And it's late at night for me, but don't worry about that. My name is Nick Pilcher, and I work for the Marine, or I run the Marine Research Foundation. And we'll talk about that in a second. But right now, I'm working on a project in Saudi Arabia, helping the government of Saudi Arabia design marine conservation initiatives. So just a bit of background for those of you who might not know me. I'm a sea turtle biologist by training. I've spent most of my life working with sea turtles. And then in about 2010, I started working a lot more with other species, with dugongs, which is like a manatee, and also with sharks and rays, and primarily focusing my time on reduction of bycatch at sea. I set up my own private NGO in Malaysia. It's called the Marine Research Foundation. And we're a very small agency, all of 4 people, but we work on projects not only in Malaysia, but across many countries in the Indo-Pacific, which is why I'm in Saudi Arabia, but we've also worked in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, in Iran, in India, Pakistan, Philippines, Indonesia, Timor-Leste, you name it. I mean, more countries than I could name in the next 10 minutes. So MRF is quite a small organization, but the way we operate is that we operate in partnership with local agencies. So we provide the technical expertise and the science and the guidance, and we work with local collaborating partners in different countries to implement conservation projects. And because of that, I get to have all kinds of fun and swim in a variety of places doing very, very silly things. Like in this photograph, swimming right in front of a big 14-meter sperm whale, which wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done in my days. But yeah, so working for MRF has been quite an adventure and continues to be. And right now, for the last 3 months and for the month coming up, I'm in the middle of doing surveys of marine megafauna across the entire Red Sea. So we're counting dugongs, we're counting dolphins, whales, turtles, sharks, rays, and pretty much anything else that comes in between. So it's quite an exciting opportunity. And we're doing all of this in a helicopter. And so over the last few months, I've flown something like 8,500 kilometers in a small helicopter, crisscrossing the Red Sea, counting marine megafauna. So just a little bit of background on MRF, my organization, just to give you a rough idea of the things we do. We're a non-profit organization based in a place called Kota Kinabalu, which is at the north of Borneo, which is one of the largest islands on the planet. We have 4 full-time staff. Occasionally we have short-term staff, but we do have multiple interns that come through the year. So at any point in time, we'll have 3 or 4 people in the office helping out. And over the year, we might end up taking 30 or 40 people on projects. probably the most important thing that we're involved in is in developing practical solutions to conservation. And I'll talk about a couple of some ideas of that in a couple of minutes. But really, it's about trying to find simple and practical ways to solve problems rather than just knowing that they exist and not doing anything about it. Now, we work with numerous government partners in different countries, but we also do a lot of work with industry. And that might seem a little bit sort of counterintuitive when you think that we're a conservation agency. You know, why would we work with an oil and gas company, or why would we work with a port or a mine or a shipping industry? And the truth is that none of those industries are going to go away tomorrow. And the way we think about it is that if we rely on some really low rate organization to assist these companies, then they're going to end up with the wrong solutions and they'll probably end up doing more harm. But by getting involved with them, we provide practical guidance in moving forward, and actually have helped many of them solve some big challenges that they face in terms of overlaps between their footprint and marine species. And so that also helps with funding some of our work. We do get funds for some of our projects independently, but then when we want to run other projects, then we can use funding that we get from corporate clients. And really, it's about having fun while we do it. We really do. We set up the organization in such a way that we think of a great, cool project, and then we go and look for money for it. And once we've got money for it, we go out and have fun. And that's pretty much how we operate. Some of the key things that we've managed to achieve, this is a dugong, by the way, in the photograph with a little baby that I took. I took this photograph from the helicopter about 10 days ago. But in the last few years, MRF has basically single-handedly made Malaysia implement turtle excluder devices as a legal requirement. We are an official advisor to the Malaysian government on bycatch. We've worked closely with CITES doing turtle trade assessments. We've worked with CMS and undertaken a large global dugong bycatch and fisheries assessment. And we implement Southeast Asia's only long-term in-water foraging ground research project. So for a small organization of 4 people, I think that's quite a lot of work to be doing on a given day. But for what we're supposed to be talking about today, let's focus down on this bycatch project that we've been implementing in Sabah. And the project initially started, with a focus on sharks and rays. And it started that way because there have been these declines in these species and something needed to be done about it. And what we found along the way was that the work we were doing to address shark and ray bycatch was similarly addressing sea turtle bycatch. Trying to put something into context for you to try and give you a rough idea. Sharks and rays have declined dramatically across the planet, not just in Malaysia. And many of these species are classified as endangered by IUCN, or they are listed by CITES in such a way that trade is prohibited. At the same time, sharks and rays are declining. Sea turtles are also being taken in massive numbers as bycatch in the world's fisheries, including those offshore in Peru, although steps are being taken to address that by some great people. And bycatch is probably the biggest problem we face. The world is talking about climate change and plastics and all kinds of other things. But let me tell you that if we could solve the bycatch issue, we probably would have taken 80 or 90% of all pressures off many marine species that are endangered. And in Sabah, in Malaysia, where I'm based, the situation is probably the same. And you probably wonder, what do you mean probably the same? Why wouldn't it be the same? And the answer is that really there are no data to support that sort of a claim, right? In order to know whether sharks, rays, and turtles have declined, you would need to be able to have some sort of a benchmark to compare that to, or you'd have to have some sort of a program that collected that sort of information. And so in Sabah, we just don't have that sort of information. And even though I believe firmly that the case is that these species have declined, how do you tell a minister, how do you convince the minister of agriculture who's responsible for fisheries that we should protect the species if there's no evidence that says this species is in trouble? And forget what we think. Right? We have to be very practical and say, right, well, a minister can't just walk out and say, well, we believe that this species might be in trouble, so whatever. That's not how the world works. And another big problem is we have no idea if turtles and sharks and rays are being taken. Where is this happening? Because if you don't know where it's happening, how do you solve it? And so these two things are probably the greatest bottleneck or the greatest challenge in trying to address bycatch in Sabah. And so I want to take a couple of minutes just to try and focus down on what do we really need to know to save a species? And I want you to think this through carefully, because I think sometimes in science we get way too carried away thinking about things that need to be done. But after spending many years working on saving species, I think in reality that it's just three things. Just three things. If we knew these three things, we could save a species. And that's pretty amazing, right? So one, obviously, how many of these things do we have? And it doesn't matter whether it's parrots or orchids or turtles or sharks or rays or anything. It wouldn't matter. How many do we have? That's an important, we need to know the number. The second thing we need to know is where are they? If we don't know where they're at, then it's impossible to do anything about it. And finally, we need to know what the threats are. Because if you don't know what the threats are, you don't really know what to do. You could have some sort of secondary questions behind those. What are the trends? Are the numbers going up or down? And when we say turtles are over here or sharks are over there, is that all the time, or is that limited to a certain season? You know, is it time bound? Is there a particular time at which species are found in a particular area? And I suppose if we're going to know the threats, then we probably should think about what we would do about them. And you know, here's my absolutely high quality graph of life science for you. You can see that I'm right there with the best of people who draw things. But if I told you that we had this many sea turtles or this many sharks, well, okay, that's great. Doesn't really tell us very much. If I said that there are 6,122 sea turtles in Peru, well, okay, great. What does that really tell me? I suppose what we really would need to know is we'd also need to know how many of those we had at a second point in time. Right? Because that at least would allow us to figure out whether the trend was going up or down. And this is key, right? We need to know the number of animals we have and whether the trend is going up or down. If the trend is the same or the trend is going up, then we're not going to worry about them. How many of you ever worry about sheep or cows or goats or horses? And the answer is never, because the numbers of those species are not declining. So we only really focus on the species that are declining. And by all means, that's where we should do, right? The second one of those questions, right, is if we have a blank slate and we don't know where these animals are, how are we going to know what we should do about them? Or even more importantly, if we have no idea where they are, how can we count them? Right? So that question number 2 is pretty critical, because if you can't count them, then you can't answer question number 1. And then finally, this issue of threats. In this case, we have our little playful sea turtles in one place and the fisheries over somewhere else. And in this context, this is not a problem. I would go home and have dinner. The turtles are in one place all happy, and the fishing is happening somewhere else and they're all happy. And there is no overlap, so it's not a problem. But what happens when these two things overlap? Whether it's fully or partially, at this point, we know that we have a problem, and a problem that needs solving. Okay. So hopefully that gives you some idea of how these 3 questions become so important. And these are the things behind the technology that we're going to talk about. So how did we start to address some of this in Sabah? And the answer is we started to answer some of these questions with some home-built, some homemade time-lapse cameras. A time-lapse camera is just simply a camera that takes a photograph after a certain number of seconds. Just like all of you can do with your phones, you can take a photograph and it can take multiple photographs with a time interval in between. So it's nothing more complicated than that. And why would we build our own? Well, the truth is that we started with a commercial product and we weren't happy with it at all. It didn't work the way it was advertised. It kept on failing and we couldn't get the technical support we wanted. They were expensive, extremely expensive, and they came with data management packages that really didn't suit us and didn't interest us. What we really wanted was just access to the photographs. And so what we did is we built our own. And in fact, we built our own, the brackets that you can see, the black and the purple and the blue, these brackets are just printed on a 3D printer in our office. So I mean, we really built our own. We didn't even have to go out. But we basically started with a Raspberry Pi mini computer board and a camera. And we had those on a drone that I'd been building the year before. So it wasn't even, we had to go out and buy it. And those run on 5 volts and we had a 12-volt battery. So, okay, well, we just get a controller and drop down the voltage from 12 to 5. And now we needed to program the Raspberry Pi mini computer to be able to take pictures. And if you go to Google and type in time-lapse camera code, there will be 1,000 or more responses on how you can do that. And there are YouTube videos and there's all kinds of things. So we're not clever people. We just went to YouTube University. Add to that a solar panel and a battery and pretty much you're done. And importantly, this is a key point, that these cameras cost us a quarter of what it costs to buy the commercial units, right? Now, when you want to spread multiple cameras across a fishery, the more cameras you can deploy, the more data you get. And so the cheaper the cameras are, the more data you can collect for the same amount of money. So I'm going to take a moment and give credit to this young lady. She has spent a lot of time working on this project and has actually taken over and runs the program on her own. So Casey, wherever you are in the fishing industry right now, my hat off to you for all that you've done on this project. But Casey spent a lot of time going through cameras and pulling them apart and figuring out what would work and what wouldn't work, soldering batteries together and coming up with solutions that worked, and also a whole bunch of solutions that didn't work. Trust me, not everything worked beautifully on day one. But finally, this is about where we finally ended up. The gray box on the outside is just an electrical box that you use in households, for fuse boxes and things like that. And then the black tray at the bottom that holds everything is just printed on our 3D printer. And it's just printed to fit exactly into the box the right way without moving. And so if in the top left, you can see the cable comes in from outside. We have a voltage step down converter that takes from 12 to 5 volts. And then the 5 volts goes into a Raspberry Pi. And the Raspberry Pi has a GPS module. And what that does is it means that every photograph we take can be time-stamped with the date and time, but importantly, also the exact location. So that's important. So we have this GPS module attached. And then obviously we need to store all these pictures. So we have a 1 terabyte hard drive that fits inside the unit. And then finally sitting on top is a little camera. And the camera is a 8 megapixel camera that takes photographs. And we've got it programmed at the moment to take photographs every 5 seconds. If you put all of that together, you can see we have a big solar panel that charges a battery, and the battery then runs the camera. And it might look big and bulky and not as compact as some professional units. But the truth is that we didn't need it to be any smaller because the boats are massive and there's plenty of space to put all of these things. And so finally, we've got a bracket that fits on the vessel and a ball mount that allows us to adjust the camera to get exactly the right angle when it's facing down. So here you can see, so another thing that we've done is we have our own proprietary app that allows us to log onto our cameras. And that way, what we can do is we can have one person up on the mast of the boat, adjusting the angle of the camera so that we get the best view of the deck, as you can see up here in the right-hand side. And we can see that image on the phone. And then when we finally get the camera into the perfect position, yep, that's perfect. And then that gets tightened down and that won't move over the next couple of weeks. And then in the bottom couple of images, you can see how it all sort of fits together on a fishing boat, with the solar panel and the battery and the camera sitting up top. And then this is a couple of photographs showing you how our team have to operate. They kind of clamber up on these masts and tighten things down. It's kind of high sometimes, but then you can see how the camera sits looking straight down on a deck, which allows us to capture pictures of whatever the fishing boat collects. And this is one of those pictures. So now if you can imagine that the boat is out fishing, doing its thing, and every time the catch is unloaded up on the deck, then the camera continues taking a photograph every 5 seconds. And you can see in the little red circle how there's a stingray just there that got dumped on this deck as part of the rest of the catch. And so it gives us the opportunity to collect data on these. Now, the way these vessels operate is they trawl for about 4 hours, and then they bring the nets in, and the nets get dumped onto the deck. Immediately, the net gets put back in the water and the boat starts fishing again. And for the next 30 minutes or so, the crew will sort the catch and put it all away in the hold. So over the next 30 minutes, we get a whole suite of photographs of this back deck. And as they move things around, there might be sharks and rays underneath the pile of things that we get to see. And so it's useful to have multiple photographs because we need to be able to see the deck at different times. Now, it's not always that easy. Like the picture I showed you just now is a great photograph during the day, but this is a photograph taken at night. And you can see that things are just a little bit more difficult in terms of identifying some of the species that we'd be looking for. So yeah, life is not always easy, and you just have to get used to that. Okay, so back to daytime. And if you look carefully, you can see this big, massive shark that's caught right here. And this is a very easy one to see. So some of the things we look for are very straightforward, very easy, and very big. But that's not always the case. Here's another one, shovel nose or bottlenose shark, very big, you know, a couple of meters in length. So something like this is very easy to see. And here you have a big, huge stingray. So, okay, this is easy to see. But then sometimes you have to look a little bit more carefully. Here's a little baby eagle ray that, okay, is in the photograph. But, you know, you have to stop and look at each of these things quite carefully. This one's even more difficult. If you look carefully where the yellow circle is, you can see a small shark. And I guess this is a really good photograph to try and highlight some of the challenges that we have, right? So all of you could probably picture the shape of a shark. You know, it has that pointy nose and it has the fin across the top and it has two pectoral fins. And so if you were to see a shark from the side, you would know exactly what you were looking at. But what about when it's on its side like this? This makes it a lot harder. And certainly it makes it a lot harder when it's the same color as the deck. And it gets even harder when it's mixed in amongst some other species, excuse me. And this is one of the biggest challenges we have, is in actually being able to spot these species in the photographs that we get. Sorry, let me just go back one time. So to give you an idea, if a camera takes a photograph every 5 seconds, do you know how many photographs that is in a day? That's 17,000 photographs per day. We have 37 cameras, and they're all operating pretty much all the time. So we are getting hundreds of thousands of photographs every single day. Now, the photographs when the boat is fishing and there's nothing happening on the deck, we can just throw those away. But it still means we have loads and loads of photographs to deal with. And you might be wondering why we don't have an artificial intelligence program to pick out sharks and rays. And the answer is because they don't always look like sharks and rays. And a computer system would probably miss them, whereas having the human eye look very carefully for them, eventually we can find them. And so it takes a number of staff and interns multiple hours to go through photographs and find the instances of bycatch. So what do we do with that sort of data once we have it? Because we have the location where these animals were caught, and we have the time and date, which means that once we have quite a lot of data, we can actually start to develop density heat maps. And if you have sufficient data, you can do that by month. As you can see in this graphic here, we actually know what happens from month to month. And what's interesting in this, if you look at the month of August, there is a hotspot down in the south. But that hotspot doesn't occur in March or July. It happens in that sort of August time. And it's related to a particular fishery that happens. It's a traditional fishery. But it's very interesting that you can pick up on patterns based on time as well as based on location. And not only do we do this for just sharks, but we can do this for a variety of different species. So the wedge fish, or the shovel-nosed sharks, which are critically endangered under IUCN ruling, You can see how we can split those out, and we can pick apart where the hotspot for bycatch for that group is. We can do the same thing for hammerhead sharks. Similarly, we can do the same thing for sea turtles, and we can do it for stingrays, and in some cases, even down to species. One of the other things that we've been able to do with this time-lapse data is to overlay that data with existing marine protected areas. So in this particular case, you can see the green box is a marine park. And now we can see that 50% or more of the bycatch that's happening is happening inside of the park boundaries. Now, this particular park is a multiple use park. So it's a IUCN category 4 park that allows fishing inside the boundaries, but it does not allow fishing in some of the places where we now have data indicating these boats are present. But we can take the data on fishing, this graphic is showing you only fishing, but now we can see where sharks are being caught in that fishery. We can see where rays are being caught in that same exact fishery. We can do it for wedgefish, for the shovelnose endangered species, and we can do it for sea turtles. We can do it across the board. So not only can we look at the data that comes out on fishing effort, which is where the boats are and when they're fishing, but also overlay that with data on what species groups are being caught. Now, you could see, I'm sure, if you looked at this graphic, that if there was some way of eliminating fishing inside this park completely, we would be addressing a massive chunk of bycatch in the state, right? And we would never have been in a position of knowing that had we not had the data that was coming out of these low-cost, home-built time-lapse cameras. To give you an idea of how we then use that data to kind of focus down on some priority areas, I'm going to just quickly shift to some research that we've done in Thailand with some colleagues. And this is looking at dugongs. Dugongs are like manatees. But in this case, you can see that what we've done, well, what we've done with the data here is we've taken the fishery data and we've overlaid on top of that the dugong density data. And then we've broken it down and said, right, in the areas where we have the most fishing and the most dugongs, those are key priority sites for us to focus our conservation efforts. And so this is a way of taking data, spatial data, and overlaying it with the species distribution data in such a way as to provide a management agency with a solution to a problem. One of the other challenges with this is if you look at a heat map, something like this one that's right here, you know, these amorphous amoeba-looking circles, those are very difficult things to manage. From a management perspective, it's very difficult to tell a fisherman, you can't go into that blobby, circly, browny, pinky area. That just is too difficult to explain. And so in maritime conventions, what we do is we use latitude and longitude grids, you know, the up and down and the side to side lines. And that allows us to define points in time a lot more accurately. So if I'm not sure if hopefully you can see my mouse, but if we were to protect from this point to this point to this point to this point, we would solve this big problem. And we would only have to give fishermen these 4 coordinates. You can't go this way, you can't go this way, you can't come from the top, and you can't go from below. And that would be a way to provide some very clear direction. And so that's exactly what we've done with all of the bycatch data that we've collected for Sabah. So this green graph, this is fishing effort. So this tells you, excuse me, This tells you where boats are investing time and effort in fishing. Then we can overlay that with the areas, in this case, it's sharks. So don't worry about the group, but in this case, it's sharks. And now you can see where the absolute highest density of shark bycatch occurs. It occurs in those dark blue boxes up top. And then we can overlay that with the fishing effort, and we can come up with some priority areas. Now you might wonder why the top blue box, this one here, didn't end up becoming a high priority when we looked at it this way. And the reason is that there was less fishing effort up here. So yes, there was more sharks, but there was a lot less effort. If you were a manager and you had a limited amount of resources to invest in management of a species, then you probably would want to invest that money in the areas that were going to have the greatest impact. And then there is a second point worth thinking about as well, that when we set out to save sharks and turtles and rays with our little cameras, we never set out to hurt fishermen's ability to go fishing and earn a living. That's never been part of our goal. Our goal has always been to find the areas where bycatch occurs so that we can design alternatives. So we are not suggesting that fishermen are not allowed to go fishing. That's not at all the case. What we are suggesting now to the authorities is that fishing should be allowed, but not in these particular zones during certain times of the year. So this is what we call a time area closure. So it's closed for a certain amount of time. And another potential solution to this is a gear restriction over time. So you can fish here, but you can't use trawls. So you could use hook and line, or you might use other methods, but you can't use trawling that might take benthic species that are reproducing. So in a nutshell, I want to close and end at that point. And you've got my contact should you need, should you have any questions. And with that, I'm going to open it up to you for questions. Thank you. Instant silence.
Hey, could you see me?
Yes, yeah? I can see you.
Hi, Nicolas. I'm sorry for the delay about the Zoom, but I'm really thank you for your time and for all the knowledge that you have shown with us. I'm really impressed about the project that you are working on. I honestly think that project would help a lot here in Peru because we have many different type of animals that are in extinction, and this and I know as an environmental engineer that we can't say that fishing would have or that fishing have to stop because that is not the key. The key is working together, and I truly believe that your project would help a lot here, and maybe I also know that there where you are it's helping too. So I think that that's a really good point. And also I highlight the 3 main points that you told us about how many the amount of the animals, then how are the threats that they have. I think that this key will help us a lot also to make another research topics about fishing and all those kind of things. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and all your experience in this topic. I would like to ask if anyone of here have maybe a question or something like that. So we have here Nicolas to help us, or maybe just a comment about the presentation. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicolas. Really nice and great presentation. So I have some questions related to. So how do you install these instruments? So you talk with the special fisherman, or do you make agreement? How do you approach them?
Yeah, that is a very good question, and I can tell you that it's based on an incredibly high degree of trust. And we have worked with fishermen in Malaysia, in Sabah now, for the last 16 years on the turtle excluder device program. We've made multiple connections. We have friends. We've been to their weddings. We've been to their funerals. We've been to dinners at their homes. We've met their children. You know, we've become very much a very large family, and that trust is something that is worth a lot more than many people will ever understand. You know, no fisherman wants to have his life revealed in public. And so if you think back to the images I've shown you today, none of them show which boat caught what turtle or what shark or anything. The data is just summarized into a map. It doesn't say, you know, boat number XYZ went out and caught 14 turtles, and we would never do that. And initially, when we started working with fishermen, there was some skepticism. You know, some captains would say, well, I'll wait till he does it. And if he does it, I'll think about it. And once we had one or two captains that were willing to have the cameras on their boats, and then nobody got into trouble because we weren't giving secret information to the authorities, then that trust grew immensely. And fishermen, you know, they all talk amongst themselves, and you would be amazed that when they talk about our organization, and you can hear them, it's like, oh, don't worry about them, they're on our side. And so that is a very good question, because if you don't develop trust with the fishing community you're working with, then getting to a point where you could put a camera on their boat to take a photograph of everything they're doing becomes a little bit tricky. So we've been very lucky in that sense by having a big amount of trust amongst the fishing community that has allowed us to put cameras on their boats.
Thank you. Really nice lesson, actually. This is something that we, as academy, sometimes we don't understand how to work with, how to communicate the science to them and to try to introduce them in our work. So this is a really great. The other question that I have is related to the students or the academy. So the students in Malaysia have the chance to make some practice with your institution?
Yes, actually in Malaysia, the universities have a compulsory 3-month internship program. It's called, in Malaysia, it's called the industrial training. And all university students have to go and do an internship somewhere. So some of them go to the Department of Fisheries, some of them go to engineering firms, some of them end up with us, some of them go to a couple of other NGOs. And so that every year I have more applicants than I could ever take in. Let me tell you, I probably get about 200 applications every year, and I can take maybe 20. And so that's not a very big success rate for the applicants, and it's not because I don't want more. It's that we have a very small office, and I wouldn't know what to do with that many people. But yes, we do have a program for university students to come through and be part of it. 2 of our current staff are ex-interns of ours. So they were people who were interns initially, and then they were so good that they got offered a full-time job, and now they're part of the family. And so yeah, it's a compulsory process in Malaysia. Excellent.
So maybe some some people wants to ask something. I think they are impressed about your work. I'm really impressed about the work that you made. I have another question related to the marine protected areas.
Yep.
In this area is any region under these protected areas or?
So right now, what we're doing, one of the challenges in Malaysia that we have is that the government process for declaring a marine protected area is ever so long, 10 or 15 years. And it's because of the way the government is set up and the constitution and the politics. And so what we're trying to do is actually to find alternatives to MPAs. And so instead of trying to get the government to declare an area a protected area, what we think is better is actually to declare them as fisheries management areas. So by all means, you can fish, and during certain months of the year, you can fish normally, and at other times of the year, we might have gear restrictions, or we might have complete bans on fishing in certain zones. And so rather than banning fishing altogether, we're trying to use a spatial approach to fisheries management. Now, this is very new in Malaysia. This hasn't ever been done before. And so we're now embarking on a program with the Department of Fisheries to put tracking devices on vessels and have the government declare this as a temporary 1-year managed area, and to look into the effectiveness of how we can enforce that and how we can keep track of vessel movements. Because if we can solve it this way, then we probably could bypass a very expensive and time-consuming process and end up with the exact same result. So, you know, one of the challenges with a protected area, and certainly in the developing world, maybe not so much in the developed world, but where I am in Malaysia, a park is somewhere where you lock the door and that's it, nobody can go anymore. And that's not really that doesn't even come close to embracing the principles of the Sustainable Development Goals, does it? I mean, how could you have sustainable development if you can't use an area? Then, you know, this might sound like, and I'm sorry if it's in English and it's difficult to translate, but a very wise man once told me, you cannot have sustainable use without some level of use. Now, that should be quite straightforward, right? But we don't think about it that way. We kind of go, right, well, then, you know, that species is protected and nobody can ever touch it. Well, that's not sustainable use of that species. That's just locking it and throwing the key away. And so if we want to think about sustainability on this planet, I think we need to be a lot more clever in our approaches to how we manage areas and how we manage natural resources. You know, by doing it like this, by allowing fishermen to continue to fish, but maybe with certain temporary restrictions that just shift them away from areas, say, where hammerheads are pupping. You know, when it's reproduction time in hammerhead land, we want to make sure that that's not a time when trawl boats are fishing and capturing, you know, hundreds and hundreds of young pups that will never grow into adult hammerheads. If we can manage the fishery around things like that, then I think we're much better placed. The challenge is that from a terrestrial standpoint, we are completely accustomed to, you plant rice during certain seasons and you harvest it at certain times, and you have to let fields lay in fallows or not used during a certain number of years. We're so used to these sorts of management measures and we never question them. And yet when somebody suggests maybe we should set a certain piece of ocean aside for a few months to let animals reproduce, all of a sudden that seems like a very strange thought. And I guess one of my goals is to try and make it less of a strange thought.
Thank you.
And incidentally, for all of you, because you have so much spare time, I'm sure, I put a notice up on the chat that says you could check out Borneo Ocean Diaries on YouTube if you just search for that. And the reason I'm suggesting it is because this is a series that was produced last year. They're short, 10, 12-minute little movies. But there is one particular one about this project, about the cameras project. And I think it's might be episode 6, possibly 5, but I think 6. But I mean, by all means, you can watch others, but you probably get bored. But episode 6 is about these cameras, in case anybody was interested and wanted to take a quick look.
Yeah, thanks, Nicolas. I will check it after this webinar because I'm really interested into this into project, but also in how it works. So it will be a nice option to learn more about it. I'm not sure if there are more questions or comments about the webinar. Please feel free to.
Everybody's very shy.
Ask them. Well, I think all.
You can ask in Spanish if you're that shy.
Ok. Chicos, no sé si alguno tenga alguna pregunta más o algún comentario más adicional sobre la ponencia de ahora. Oh, claro, también pueden hacer sus preguntas en español, si se les hace más sencillo. Y las comento.
Yo les contestaré en inglés, pero las pueden preguntar en español.
No sabía que también hablaba español.
Sí, pero mi español es español de España, no el mismo.
Bueno, pero no son muy poquitas las diferencias, así que nos debe estar entendiendo súper bien. Sobre el desarrollo del instrumento o algo por el estilo, chicos.
Well, I can tell you while you're all thinking about questions that it might seem really daunting up front to design a little camera like this, but really it's all stuff that you can do with I mean, we built these cameras for like $100 and some odd, and okay, that might sound expensive, but when I bought the commercial one, that was $1,500 per camera. So you imagine, you know, when they didn't work, now I had $1,500 sitting there doing nothing, and it was a complete waste of money. I was extremely angry, and a lot of the way I think is, you know, there has to be a solution to something, and you know, you'd be amazed how useful YouTube is, but just Google and finding things on the internet. How do I make a time-lapse camera? Okay, nobody thought about it from you know, a fisheries management perspective, but when you stop and think of the question first, then the solution for the equipment is the easy bit, right? It's figuring out what is the question first. And I get a lot of people that come to me and, oh, you know, we need you to design a drone survey. Okay, but what do you want to know? Well, I don't know, but I need a drone. Well, okay, yeah, but what exactly are we going to answer with your drone? Well, I don't know, but I need a drone. and you see, the drone is really only the tool to get the job done, right? A drone is not the research question. Now, if the research question was, I want to know where turtles are distributed over a short bay, you know, in a small bay, and I want to do it once a month, a drone might be a perfect tool to stick up in the air and collect that sort of information. And it might be one of the easiest ways to do it. But if you said, oh, I want to survey sea turtles across the Red Sea, then no, I'm sorry, you're going to need a big helicopter and you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of fuel to be able to cover that sort of an area. So that's why I say it's important to think of what is the question first that you're asking. And once you've got the question, the tool is just how you're going to answer that question. Is, you know, a lot of people think that that for us, it's the cameras that are the exciting bit. But in fact, for us, the exciting bit is knowing that we've got the data now to solve a massive bycatch challenge. All right, no other questions? No? Everybody's sleeping, shy?
Well, here is like 4 p.m. Well,
Time to go home.
Chicos, no sé si hay alguna duda más o algún comentario, o quizá todo claro, sino ya para cerrar la sesión por esta vez y ya en una próxima oportunidad nos veremos nuevamente. Creo que por ahora no veo comentarios ni manos alzadas. Entonces, en general igual la ponencia estaba muy completa y muy accesible. Entonces, bastante disfrutable también. Entonces, creo que no hay más dudas por esa parte. Y bueno, creo que eso es todo. Well, thank you so much, Nicolas, for your time
Absolutely.
and your experience in this topic is so useful for us as students and also as a professor, future professionals, to know these kind of topics.
Not a problem. You all enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, and thank you. See you soon. Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye. Gracias.
Adiós.
Adios.